Why did you sleep on the couch? The billionaire CEO found her roommate leaving at sunrise. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's emotional story about two women who discover that sharing the same home can slowly change everything they thought they understood about independence, vulnerability, and love, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story from our channel. It is quick, it is completely free, and your support helps us continue bringing you more heartfelt, dramatic, and unforgettable stories about courage, healing, second chances, and love between women. Every subscription and every moment you spend listening truly means the world to us. And before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from today? Share your city or country in the comments below. It is always wonderful to see how far these stories travel, and how many people around the world are listening together. Thank you so much for being here. Now, let us return to our main character, to a quiet house in Boston, and to the unexpected woman who was about to teach her that owning a beautiful house and having a true home were two very different things. The loneliest place I ever lived had 5 bedrooms, 4 fireplaces, and nobody waiting for me when I came home. My name is Rebecca Sterling, and at 46, I had built the kind of life business magazines described with words like extraordinary, disciplined, and enviable. Sterling North Technologies employed more than 6,000 people, our Boston headquarters occupied 32 floors of glass and steel, and my calendar was usually booked 3 weeks ahead. I could walk into a conference room with 20 executives and know exactly what everyone wanted before they finished speaking. What I could not explain was why I sometimes sat in my car for 5 minutes after arriving home, staring at the warm lights of my Beacon Hill townhouse without wanting to go inside. The house was beautiful. Red brick, tall windows, original 19th century woodwork restored at considerable expense. 5 bedrooms, although I used only one. The others remained perfectly arranged for guests who rarely came. My kitchen was larger than my childhood bedroom, yet most nights dinner arrived in a paper bag from whatever restaurant my assistant ordered. I told myself I preferred it that way. Independence had been the closest thing my father gave me to a family philosophy. Need less from people, he used to say, and they have less power to disappoint you. I listened. I became excellent at needing nothing. Then, on a cold Monday morning in November, Natalie Hayes walked into a preservation meeting and disagreed with me in front of 11 people. Sterling North was funding the redevelopment of several historic properties near a community corridor in Boston. I wanted the project approved before Thanksgiving. Natalie, the architectural preservation consultant, wanted us to revise part of the plan. She was 36, with light brown hair, an ordinary leather portfolio, and none of the nervous energy people usually brought into meetings with me. The proposed entrance eliminates too much of the original facade, she said. The redesign improves accessibility and increases usable space, I replied. Then improve accessibility without erasing what makes the building worth saving. The room went silent. I looked around the table. Several people suddenly found their documents fascinating. You disagree with the architectural team? I asked. I disagree with anyone when I think they are wrong. That almost made me smile. Almost. And you think I am wrong? Natalie met my eyes. Do you want the best answer? Or the answer everyone is afraid to disagree with? Nobody spoke. Something about the question followed me long after the meeting ended. Most people saw my title before they saw me. Natalie seemed to have skipped that step entirely. Later that afternoon, I found her alone in the lobby, standing beside 2 large sample cases while speaking on the phone. How long? She asked, then closed her eyes. 4 weeks? I cannot stay there with the walls opened up. I should have kept walking. Her housing problem was none of my business. Instead, I stopped beside the elevator. Natalie ended the call and noticed me. Everything all right? I asked. My apartment has water damage behind one wall. Apparently the repairs are more extensive than expected. Where will you stay? I will figure something out. There was that independence again, familiar enough to irritate me. My townhouse was less than 2 miles away. 5 bedrooms, 4 of them empty. The solution was obvious, practical, and temporary. At least that was what I told myself when I heard my own voice say, I have a guest floor you could use. Natalie stared at me as if I had just suggested something completely unreasonable. Maybe I had. I simply did not know yet that 4 temporary weeks were about to make my enormous house feel smaller, warmer, and far more dangerous to my carefully controlled life. Natalie looked at me for several seconds before saying, "You are offering me a room in your house?" "A guest floor," I corrected, as though the extra square footage made the suggestion more reasonable. She folded her arms. "Rebecca, yesterday we disagreed in front of half your project team. That does not make you homeless. Temporarily displaced. Fine. Temporarily displaced." Her mouth curved into a reluctant smile, and I felt an unexpected satisfaction at having caused it. She still refused. Then she refused again when I mentioned there was a separate bathroom and private entrance. "I do not want my housing situation connected to my work," she said. That answer made me respect her more than I wanted to admit. "Then we separate them completely. No favors on the project, no expectation that you agree with me. 4 weeks, and you contribute whatever rent makes you comfortable." Natalie studied me. "And if I tell you your redevelopment plan is terrible while I am eating breakfast in your kitchen? I reserve the right to defend myself over coffee." She laughed softly. "That sounds dangerous." 2 days later, she arrived at my Beacon Hill townhouse with 3 suitcases, 6 books, 1 small houseplant, and enough groceries to suggest she believed my refrigerator was experiencing a personal crisis. I showed her the guest floor, explained the security system, handed her a key, and immediately established boundaries. "My schedule is unpredictable. You do not need to wait for me. The housekeeper comes Monday and Thursday. If you need anything, text me." Natalie leaned against the doorway. "Do you always give orientation speeches when people enter your house?" "Nobody enters my house." The words came out before I could reconsider them. Her expression softened. "Well, someone does now." That evening I stayed at the office until 9:30, partly because of work and partly because going home suddenly felt unfamiliar. When I finally opened the front door, I smelled rosemary, onions, and something warm simmering in the kitchen. I stopped in the hallway. Music played quietly somewhere ahead. Natalie stood at the stove wearing jeans and a gray sweater, stirring a pot. "Before you panic," she said, "I did not reorganize anything." "I am not panicking. You have been standing there for 15 seconds. I set down my briefcase. "What is that? Chicken and wild rice soup. You cooked?" "That is generally how soup happens." I almost reminded her that I could have dinner delivered from anywhere in Boston. Instead, I sat at the kitchen island while she placed a bowl in front of me. Steam carried the scent of herbs upward. I took 1 spoonful and realized how long it had been since someone had cooked in that kitchen because they wanted to, not because they were paid to. "Good?" she asked. "Very." That sounded painful. I am capable of compliments. I have not seen sufficient evidence. I laughed before I could stop myself. Natalie smiled and returned to the stove. Something shifted in the room, small enough that I could have ignored it. I noticed her houseplant on the windowsill. Her scarf hung beside my coat near the door. A paperback rested on the counter, where nothing unnecessary was ever allowed to remain. Signs of another person had appeared throughout my perfectly controlled house in less than 12 hours. Strangely, I did not want to remove any of them. "How was your day?" Natalie asked. I nearly answered with the automatic word I gave everyone. "Fine." Instead, I told her about a difficult meeting. She listened. Not because I was her chief executive officer, not because she wanted something. She simply listened. That night, after Natalie went upstairs, I stood alone in the kitchen looking at 2 empty soup bowls beside the sink. For years, silence had been normal. Now, after one dinner, it sounded different. And when I heard Natalie walking across the floor above me, I realized the most unsettling thing was not that someone else was living in my house. It was how quickly I had begun to like knowing she was there. By the end of Natalie's first week in my house, I had discovered that another person could change a room without moving a single piece of furniture. Every morning, I found coffee beside my laptop before my first call. Every evening, there was evidence that life had happened while I was gone. A book left open on the sofa, a ceramic mug beside the sink, soft music drifting from the kitchen. I told myself these were insignificant details. Then Thursday morning arrived without coffee, because Natalie had an early site inspection, and I stood beside the empty counter feeling absurdly disappointed. That evening I came home before 7. Natalie looked up from the dining table, where architectural drawings covered nearly half the surface. You are home early. I live here. Technically, yes. I removed my coat. I occasionally see the property during daylight. She laughed and returned to her drawings. I should have gone upstairs to work. Instead, I sat across from her. What are you changing? Your project. That sounds threatening. Only to people emotionally attached to unnecessary glass. For 40 minutes, we argued about the preservation plan. Natalie challenged me without hesitation, and I realized I had begun looking forward to disagreement because hers never felt like disrespect. She wanted the work to be better, not herself to appear smarter. Later, she made pasta, while I opened a bottle of sparkling water. Somewhere between dinner and cleanup, we argued about the thermostat. 72 degrees is excessive, I said. It is November in Boston. 68 is perfectly comfortable. For a penguin. I laughed so suddenly that water nearly spilled from my glass. Natalie pointed at me. There, that sound. You should do that more often. Disagree with you? Laugh. The word settled somewhere unexpectedly tender. 2 nights later, heavy wind swept through Beacon Hill, and the power went out shortly after 9. The townhouse became completely still. I found Natalie near the front windows with 2 flashlights and a blanket. Your extremely expensive house is currently losing an argument with the weather, she said. We sat on the living room floor near the fireplace while city lights flickered beyond the glass. Without laptops or schedules, conversation wandered into places I usually avoided. Natalie told me her mother had raised her to believe asking for help was not failure. I told her my father believed the opposite. He used to say needing people gave them power over you. Natalie was quiet for a moment. Did that make you strong? I thought so. That was not what I asked. I looked at her. Candlelight softened her expression, but there was nothing accusing in it. It made me successful. Still not the same answer. I almost smiled. You are persistent. Occupational hazard. The wind pressed softly against the windows. I finally admitted it made me careful. Natalie nodded as though she understood the word beneath the word. Lonely. She did not say it. Somehow that made me trust her more. Depending on someone and controlling them are not the same thing, she said. My chest tightened. What does that mean? It means letting someone matter does not make you weak, and caring about someone does not mean you own their choices. Before I could answer, every lamp in the room came back on at once. The moment broke. Natalie stood and folded the blanket. Good night, Rebecca. Good night. I watched her climb the stairs, then noticed 2 coffee mugs on the floor beside me. 2. Such a small number. Yet the next morning, when I opened my calendar, I moved my 8 o'clock dinner meeting to another day. I told my assistant it was because I needed a quiet evening at home. What I did not tell her was that home had recently started meaning someone other than me. During Natalie's 2nd week in my house, I began measuring my days by moments I would never have considered important before she arrived. The sound of the coffee grinder at 6:45. Her keys landing in the ceramic bowl near the front door. The faint music she played while cooking. The way she always asked about my day, and somehow waited long enough to receive the real answer. On Tuesday evening, I left the office at 6:30, even though 3 unread reports remained on my desk. My assistant looked genuinely concerned. Is everything all right? She asked. Perfectly. You are leaving before 7. I am aware. When I reached Beacon Hill, Natalie was sitting cross-legged on the living room rug surrounded by preservation photographs. She looked up. Twice in 1 week. Should I notify the business press? I can go back to work. Absolutely not. I made lasagna. I stopped removing my coat. You made lasagna? That reaction is exactly why I made lasagna. An hour later, we were sitting at the dining table arguing about whether Boston winters built character or merely encouraged people to complain creatively. I realized halfway through dinner that I had not checked my phone once. That frightened me more than it should have. The following morning, Natalie received an email while we were drinking coffee. Her face brightened. Good news. They finished replacing the damaged section of my apartment wall. The inspection is next week. That is good, I said. The words sounded convincing. The feeling did not. If everything passes, I could move back sooner than expected. I looked down at my coffee. 4 weeks had always been temporary. Somehow I had stopped treating it that way. Of course. Natalie watched me for a moment. You sound disappointed. I am thinking about a meeting. It was an unnecessary lie, and we both knew it. That night, I stayed at the office until nearly 10, angry at myself for caring whether a guest remained in a house that had functioned perfectly well without her. When I finally came home, one lamp was still glowing in the living room. Natalie was asleep on the sofa, a book resting against her sweater. I stood there longer than I should have. She had apparently been waiting for me. I picked up the folded blanket from the chair and carefully placed it over her. Natalie stirred and opened her eyes. What time is it? Almost 10:30. I was going to make tea. You fell asleep. Apparently. She sat up, and the blanket slipped toward her lap. I reached to catch it at the same moment she did. Our hands touched. Neither of us moved immediately. The room seemed suddenly smaller. Natalie looked at me with an openness that made every practiced defense in my mind feel useless. "Rebecca," she said softly. "Yes? What are we doing?" I knew she was not asking about tea. I could have told her the truth. I could have said I had started leaving work early because she was there. I could have admitted that the thought of her apartment being repaired had made my enormous house feel empty again before she had even left. Instead, I withdrew my hand. "You should get some sleep." Something changed behind her eyes. "Right." She stood, folded the blanket, and handed it to me. At the stairs, she paused. "My inspection is Friday. I remember. If it passes, I will probably move home this weekend." My chest tightened. That makes sense. Natalie nodded once and went upstairs. I remained beside the sofa holding the blanket she had left behind. For years, I had believed distance kept life simple. That night, I finally understood the flaw in that theory. Distance only feels safe until someone you care about starts walking away. Friday should have been easy. Natalie's apartment passed inspection at 11:15 that morning, which meant the problem that had brought her into my house was officially solved. I knew because she sent me a message while I was reviewing quarterly forecasts. Inspection passed. Apparently, I am no longer temporarily displaced. I stared at those words until the numbers on my screen blurred into meaninglessness. I typed, "Congratulations," then deleted it because it sounded cold. I tried, "That is great news." Deleted that too because it was not entirely true. Finally, I wrote, "I am glad everything is fixed." Natalie replied with a simple, "Thank you." No joke. No teasing. The distance between us had somehow become visible even through a phone. I left work at 7 that evening and found her in the guest room folding sweaters into an open suitcase. Her little houseplant had already disappeared from the windowsill downstairs. Seeing that empty patch of wood affected me more than any reasonable person would admit. "You are packing." Brilliant observation from a woman trusted to lead 6,000 employees. Natalie glanced over her shoulder. "I thought I would move tomorrow morning. You could stay through the weekend." "Why?" One word, and suddenly I had nowhere to hide. "You do not have to rush." "That is not what I asked." I stepped into the room. "Natalie." She stopped folding. "I asked you downstairs what we were doing, Rebecca. You changed the subject. Now you are asking me to stay without telling me why." My heartbeat quickened. Maybe there does not need to be a reason. There is always a reason. She was right, which made everything harder. I looked around the room at the half-packed suitcase, the books stacked near the door, the space already returning to its original anonymous perfection. "I have enjoyed having you here." Natalie gave a small, disappointed smile. "That sounds like something you would write in a hotel review." "What do you want me to say?" "Something true." The answer was already inside me. I liked hearing her in the kitchen. I liked arguing about the thermostat. I liked coming home and seeing a lamp left on. I liked that she challenged me without trying to defeat me. I liked that she had turned 5 bedrooms and 4 fireplaces into something that finally felt inhabited. Most frightening of all, I liked her enough that saying any of it felt like handing someone access to a part of myself I had spent decades protecting. Natalie stepped closer, not touching me, simply waiting. "Rebecca, if this has become something more for you, I need to know." I felt every instinct I had learned from my father rise at once. Need less, reveal less, stay in control. So when I finally spoke, I chose the safest words, and immediately hated them. You are staying here because you needed a room. Let us not make it complicated. Natalie became completely still. The warmth left her expression so quietly that I almost wished she had become angry instead. Understood, she said. That is not exactly what I meant. It sounded very exact. Natalie, I only meant that we agreed this was temporary. And I am respecting that. She closed the suitcase. I wanted to cross the 3 feet between us and take back every word. Instead, I stood there, trapped behind the same emotional discipline that had once made me proud. Good night, Rebecca. Good night. I returned to my bedroom but did not sleep. Sometime after midnight, I heard footsteps moving downstairs. I assumed Natalie was getting water. At 5:58 the next morning, another sound woke me, the quiet roll of suitcase wheels across hardwood. I walked into the hallway and noticed the guest room door standing open. The bed had not been slept in. Downstairs, the living room lamp was still glowing. A folded blanket rested on the couch, and Natalie stood near the front door wearing her coat, one hand wrapped around the handle of her suitcase. Pale sunrise light was beginning to fill the windows. She looked at me, and suddenly I understood that the conversation I had been too afraid to have the night before had followed me downstairs. For several seconds, neither of us moved. The house was so quiet I could hear the old clock ticking in the hallway, and the faint morning traffic beginning beyond Beacon Hill. My eyes went from Natalie's suitcase to the couch, where the blanket was folded with almost painful neatness. "Why did you sleep on the couch?" I asked. Natalie looked toward it, then back at me. "Because I did not want to sleep in the guest room." "Why?" "Because it stopped feeling like a guest room." The answer caught me completely unprepared. She tightened her hand around the suitcase handle. "Somewhere during these past weeks, I started feeling like I belonged here. Then last night you reminded me that I do not." "Natalie, that is not what I wanted to say. But it is what you said." I came down the last few stairs. I was afraid. Her expression shifted slightly. "Of me? No. Of what happens when someone matters enough that losing them becomes possible." The words felt unfamiliar in my mouth, but once I started, I could not retreat again. I spent years convincing myself that needing nobody made me strong. Then you moved into this house and suddenly I noticed when you were not in the kitchen. I changed meetings because I wanted to come home for dinner. Yesterday, when you told me your apartment was ready, I was disappointed. And instead of telling you any of that, I made you feel temporary, because temporary was easier for me to understand. Natalie's eyes softened, but she did not release the suitcase. "Rebecca, I was never asking you to promise me forever. I know that now. I was asking you to be honest." And I failed. Saying it without explanation or defense felt strangely freeing. Natalie looked toward the front windows, where the first sunlight was turning the brick buildings across the street gold. "I care about you," she said quietly. My breath caught. "But I cannot stay here hoping you will eventually become comfortable enough to admit I matter." Every part of me wanted to say, "Stay." I could have offered another month, another room, any practical excuse that would keep her inside the house. But I finally heard what she had been teaching me from the beginning. Depending on someone was not the same as controlling them. Caring about someone did not give me ownership of their choices. "You are right," I said. Natalie looked surprised. "I want you to stay, but I do not want you to stay because I made leaving difficult." I swallowed. "I am sorry. Not because you are walking out the door. I am sorry because I made you feel unwelcome in a place you had somehow made warmer, just by being here." Her eyes grew bright. "That is considerably better than your hotel review." I laughed softly, though my throat tightened. "I have been working on my communication skills for approximately 6 hours. There is room for improvement, clearly." For one hopeful second, neither of us moved. Then Natalie reached for the door. I understood. An apology did not erase what had happened, and honesty did not create an obligation to forgive immediately. "Goodbye, Rebecca. Goodbye, Natalie." She stepped outside into the cold Boston morning and pulled her suitcase behind her. I did not follow. I did not call her back. I stood in the doorway until she disappeared around the corner, then returned to the living room. Her books were gone. Her coffee mug was gone. Even the little plant was gone. Only the couch remained, perfectly ordinary beneath the morning light. I sat where she had slept and realized something I should have understood years earlier. Sometimes loving someone begins not with convincing them to stay, but with respecting their right to leave. The first Monday after Natalie left, I arrived at Sterling North before 7 in the morning and discovered that success could be an excellent hiding place if nobody questioned why you were hiding. I answered emails before sunrise, approved budgets, reviewed contracts, and filled every available hour with work. By Wednesday, my assistant quietly placed a cup of coffee on my desk and said, "You have canceled lunch 3 days in a row. I am busy. You were busy last month too. You still ate." I looked at her, ready to dismiss the observation, then stopped. Natalie would have said something similar. The thought followed me into an executive meeting that afternoon. We were discussing the preservation project when one of our junior planners hesitated over a proposed change. Normally, I would have moved the conversation forward. Instead, I asked, "What do you think?" He looked startled. "I think the community entrance should remain closer to the original design." Around the table, several people became very interested in their notes. A month earlier, I might have defended the plan immediately. "Explain why," I said. He did. Then another employee disagreed with me. Then another. 20 minutes later, we had a better solution than the one I had approved. Walking back to my office, I remembered Natalie asking whether I wanted the best answer or the answer everyone was afraid to disagree with. For the first time, I understood that control had not only shaped my personal life, it had shaped every room I entered. So I began changing small things. I delegated decisions I did not need to own. I stopped sending messages late at night unless something was genuinely urgent. I called my younger sister in Vermont simply because I had not spoken to her in months. When she answered, she asked, "Is everything okay?" I laughed. Apparently, I have trained everyone to assume affection is an emergency. The townhouse changed too, though not in the way I wanted. Without Natalie, it became silent again. Her coffee mug was gone. The kitchen smelled like nothing. The thermostat stayed exactly where I preferred it, and I discovered that winning that argument brought me absolutely no satisfaction. One evening, I sat on the couch where she had spent her final night and resisted the urge to text her. I had written the message at least 12 times. "I miss you. I am changing. Can we talk?" Every version carried the same hidden request: "Please make my discomfort disappear." So I deleted them. If I changed only to persuade Natalie to return, then change was merely another negotiation. 6 weeks passed, the preservation project moved forward, and Natalie remained involved professionally through her consulting firm, but our teams communicated through the project manager. I did not interfere. Then, one Thursday afternoon, I received an invitation to the opening of the restored community space. Natalie's name appeared beneath the architectural preservation credits. I stared at it longer than necessary. The event was Saturday. I nearly invented a scheduling conflict. Instead, I went. The restored building glowed beneath warm winter lights, its original brick facade preserved exactly as Natalie had fought to preserve it. Inside, families gathered around long tables while local artists displayed photographs of the neighborhood. I saw Natalie across the room before she saw me. She was laughing with an elderly woman beside an exhibit, and the familiar sound reached me through the crowd. My first instinct was to walk toward her. My second was to leave before she noticed me. I followed neither. I stayed where I was and let her have the choice. A minute later, Natalie turned. Our eyes met across the room. Surprise crossed her face, followed by something softer that I could not name. Then she excused herself from the conversation and began walking toward me. For once, I had no prepared speech, no strategy, and no idea what would happen next. Strangely, that no longer felt like weakness. Natalie stopped a few feet in front of me, close enough that I could see the question in her eyes, but far enough that neither of us could pretend the past 6 weeks had disappeared. "You came," she said. I almost did not. "Why?" I glanced around the restored community space. Warm light fell across the original brick walls, and families moved through rooms that existed because people like Natalie had insisted history and progress could share the same address. "Because I was afraid seeing you would make me want something I had no right to ask for." Natalie studied me. "That sounds different from the Rebecca I remember." "I hope so." A volunteer passed carrying a tray of coffee, and Natalie took 2 cups. She handed one to me without asking how I took it. Black, no sugar. She still remembered. I heard the design team change the entrance plan, she said. They did. You approved the preservation proposal. Actually, one of our junior planners improved it. I listened. Natalie raised an eyebrow. You listened? I am experimenting with several radical management techniques. She laughed, and the sound loosened something inside me that had been tight for 6 weeks. We walked toward a quieter corner near the tall windows. Outside, Boston was turning blue with early evening. I wanted to call you, I admitted. Why did you not? At first, because I was embarrassed. Later, because I realized every message I wrote was really asking you to make me feel better. Her expression softened. And now? Now I can tell you I miss you without making that your responsibility. Natalie looked down at her coffee. I missed you too. 4 simple words, and suddenly I had to remind myself to breathe. Still, I did not reach for her. I had finally learned that honesty did not need to become pressure. I am sorry for making you feel temporary, I said. You were never temporary to me. I was simply too afraid to admit how permanent the possibility of losing you felt. Natalie was quiet for a long moment. I believed you that morning. About what? When you said you cared. She looked directly at me. That was why leaving was so difficult. Then why did you leave? Because caring was not the problem. Fear was making your decisions for both of us. The truth of that landed gently this time. You were right. I know. I laughed. You have not become less difficult. And you have apparently become slightly easier. We stood there smiling like 2 women meeting again, instead of 2 women trying to repair something unfinished. Then Natalie asked, "What happens now?" 6 weeks earlier, I would have offered a plan. Dinner tonight, a weekend away, another arrangement with expectations carefully defined. Instead, I asked the smallest honest question I could find. Would you have coffee with me sometime? Natalie glanced at the cup already in her hand. This does appear to be coffee. You know what I mean. Her smile widened. Coffee sounds uncomplicated. I think I am finally ready for complicated. She laughed again, then nodded. Tuesday evening. 7, 6:30. Some of us do not schedule our lives in 15-minute increments. 6:30, I agreed. Across the room, someone called Natalie back toward the exhibit. She started to leave, then turned. Rebecca? Yes? I am glad you came. I watched her walk away and realized something had changed between us, but more importantly, something had changed inside me. I no longer needed to know where this would lead before taking the next step. For the first time, uncertainty did not feel like an empty room. It felt like an open door. Tuesday coffee became Friday dinner, and Friday dinner became a Sunday walk along the Charles River, where Natalie teased me for checking my phone twice in 20 minutes. Progress, she said. 3 months ago, you would have checked it 20 times. I am becoming remarkably irresponsible. I am very proud of you. We did not rush. That mattered. There was no contract, no temporary arrangement, and no deadline forcing either of us toward an answer. Natalie returned to her own apartment every night, and I returned to Beacon Hill alone. At first, the quiet still bothered me. Then I began to understand that being alone was different from shutting people out. I called my sister more often. I invited colleagues to disagree with me. I stopped treating every empty hour on my calendar as a problem that needed to be filled. Most importantly, I learned to tell Natalie what I felt before fear translated it into something safer. One evening in early spring, after nearly 4 months of dinners, museums, neighborhood walks, and conversations that regularly lasted longer than either of us planned, I invited her to my townhouse for dinner. When I opened the door, Natalie stood on the steps holding a small potted rosemary plant. "Your kitchen windowsill looked lonely," she said. I stared at the plant. "You remembered." Of course I remembered. She stepped inside, and for a moment we both became quiet. The house looked almost exactly as it had when she lived there. Same staircase, same paintings, same couch. But the feeling was different because this time Natalie had not arrived carrying suitcases because she needed somewhere to stay. She had come because she wanted to be there. I cooked dinner myself, which produced enough concern from Natalie that she inspected the kitchen before sitting down. "You know I can cook." I know you can acquire restaurants. Those are different skills. The pasta was slightly overcooked. She ate it anyway. After dinner, we sat on the couch with coffee. Natalie ran her hand over the familiar blanket folded beside her. I hated this couch for a while. So did I. It was not really the couch's fault. I considered replacing it. She laughed. Of course you did. I looked at her. Then I realized replacing it would not change what happened. Her smile faded into something gentler. No, but what happened changed us. I nodded. You taught me that a person can leave and still matter. That respecting someone sometimes means allowing them to make the choice you are most afraid of. Natalie reached across the space between us and took my hand. And you learned that without me forcing you to. Eventually. You are still stubborn. That appears permanent. She smiled. Months later, Natalie began leaving books at my house again. Then coffee appeared beside my laptop some mornings. Eventually, there was a toothbrush upstairs and a second coat beside mine near the door. None of it happened because I asked her to fill an empty room. Every small thing arrived through choice. One Saturday morning, almost a year after she had first walked out at sunrise, I came downstairs and found Natalie reading on the couch while snow fell softly outside. Her rosemary plant sat on the kitchen windowsill. 2 coffee mugs waited on the table. I stopped halfway down the stairs just to look at the scene. Natalie glanced up. What? Nothing. Rebecca, I smiled. I was thinking that I spent years believing this house was proof I had succeeded. She closed her book. And now? I walked over and sat beside her. Now I know a house is something you can own. A home is something people choose to build together. Natalie rested her hand in mine. The rooms around us were still the same size. The address had not changed, but the silence was gone, replaced by the quiet presence of someone who had never been purchased, persuaded, or obligated to stay. She had chosen to be there, and I finally understood that being chosen freely was worth more than being in control.